New York City is not for the faint of heart. It's definitely not for everyone, but there's also so many reasons why people fall absolutely in love with New York City. Before I moved to New York City, I myself came from a very, very small town in Connecticut. And although I couldn't wait to move to New York City, it is a little bit of an adjustment when you're coming from a suburban or country lifestyle and then transitioning into a complete urban lifestyle. And I'm gonna help you do that in this video. New York City can be a little bit of a culture shock at first because you're probably so used to being able to have so much space and being able to have a car where you're coming from and being able to just get in and go where you want at all times of the day. With New York City, simple errands, tasks are a little bit different here because you have to rely on walking everywhere or transportation, buses and subways. People don't really have a car in New York City, especially if you're living in Manhattan. Now, if you're living in other boroughs outside of Manhattan, you can definitely get away with having a car. And you can also have one in Manhattan, but it's definitely not gonna be convenient and it's definitely not gonna be cheap. So I do want to warn you about that in advance. That's a very, very common question that I get from so many people. They always wanna know, should I bring my car to New York City? My immediate answer typically is no, unless you really need it. Now, I do have a car in New York City, but at the same time, there was a time where I didn't have a car. And I do have to say, it was a lot easier when I didn't have a car than it is now for me with a car. I want you to think of a very common errand, grocery shopping. Grocery shopping in New York City is a little bit complicated because you're probably used to being able to just go in your car and pick up your groceries and bring it back in your car and then bring it home. But in New York City, you're probably walking to the grocery store and you have to be able to carry everything with you or have some type of like cart or wagon, which you will see a lot in New York City, where people literally pull their groceries down the street because it's too much for them to be able to carry at one time. So that is very, very common. And it's something that you really don't think about until you're here and experiencing it. And then you're like, oh gosh, this is not as easy as I expected. But I do also have to say, sites like Instacart have made this so much easier. Whole Foods does delivery now. So you can literally just get groceries delivered to your home for a fee. And I do have to say, it's probably worth it unless you're literally living right on top of a grocery store where you don't have to go far to get your groceries. But even then, it's nice to not have to carry everything on the streets of New York City. Laundry is another issue that a lot of New Yorkers have to deal with. You're probably not going to have laundry in your unit when you're first coming to New York City. Most people do not. It's actually pretty rare to have laundry in your unit in New York City. There's so many buildings in New York City, especially Manhattan, that don't even allow laundry in the building. You're probably not gonna have it. So what do? So you either have to do laundry in your building on like a laundry floor, or if they have laundry on your floor, that is shared with all the people on that floor, you can do that. Or you have to go to a laundromat or send your laundry out to get it done and then it's sent back to you. So these are all the ways that people do laundry here. Now, you might think that, okay, that's not that bad. It just requires a little bit more planning. But sometimes when you're dealing with laundry all the time here in New York City, it can get exhausting because you have to plan out what you're wearing so far in advance because it's just more of a process for you to wash and dry your clothes here. And also, on top of that, not only is it more of a process, but it's also pricey because now you're either paying for the machines, paying to send it out. It's always going to cost you. You're going to get a lot of steps when living in New York City. And when I mean steps is I mean like actually walking. They always say that you should hit about 10,000 steps a day. It is very, very easy to do that in New York City. If you spend a lot of time walking in your neighborhood or to other neighborhoods, like if you actually keep track and have like a Fitbit or an Apple Watch of the amount of steps that you'll do, it's kind of crazy to see all these different records you're gonna hit because you're doing so much walking in New York City. Now, I love walking around New York City. I have to say that even after all these years of being in New York City, it's still one of my favorite things to do to this day. There are some people that do not love walking around New York City, and I get it. It can sometimes be a little bit exhausting, and sometimes you feel like you don't even want to go to a certain place because you're like, oh, I'm just gonna have to walk so many blocks to get there, or have to walk to this subway to get there, and it's just a little bit too much sometimes. So I do see both sides of it, but overall, I do think that it is nice to be able to walk to where you want to go. When you first get to New York City, the subway and bus system are going to be so confusing to you. I know some people that have moved to New York City over the past 2 years, and they still hardly know how to get around on the buses or the subways. I have to say, it probably took me almost my whole life to really learn the buses and the subway system. And it's one of those things that you really should try to learn as fast as possible because it's going to make your experience so much better in New York City if you understand them. The subways are very complicated. I do have to say the buses actually probably are a little bit more complicated just because there's so many different options with the buses and you can go to just so many different neighborhoods and areas from the buses. The subway lines, you're literally just learning a line, and I mean, I guess same with the bus line, that's also a line, but it's just easier to learn the subways at first, and more people use the subways. So I would focus on the subways first and then start learning the bus system after that. Unless your neighborhood is really highly serviced by buses, then you have to, of course, start with the bus system. What's the best way to learn the subway system? There are so many apps nowadays that really dedicate to just being able to tell you which trains to take depending on where you're going. And also, if you look at like Google Maps, they tell you nowadays like which trains you can take, which trains are delayed, which is the express and the local and things like that. So you can know that from just Google Maps. I remember a time in New York City where that was not the case, and you actually had to know the subway that you were going to in advance, and there was no Google Maps. New York City is not cheap. You don't need to be watching this video to tell you that. It is expensive when it comes to rent, when it comes to dining, when it comes to drinking, when it comes to even just buying everyday goods. You're gonna have to learn how to find deals if you care about saving money, or at least making your money stretch. Because sometimes, even if you aren't really budgeting and you don't really care that much about finances, sometimes it's just a little bit frustrating to think about how much you're actually spending on things in New York City. Now, when I came to New York City, I had absolutely no money. And I do have to say I'm in a much better place now. But even to this day, I feel like that all the time. I just feel frustrated. I'm like, wow, was that really worth XYZ amount that I paid? Probably not. I think about that all the time. And that's one reason that sometimes people just get so fed up with New York City, because they just feel like what they're paying is just not worth the price here. Now, there are ways around it. There are plenty of ways to get deals in New York City when it comes to dining, when it comes to drinking, like finding happy hours and things like that. When it comes to grocery shopping or getting takeout, there's a lot of ways to find deals. However, you have to put in the time and effort to find those deals. Now, I am going to create different content on ways to find those deals, but that's a whole separate video because there's so much to go over in that. But take advantage of these different apps, these different websites that offer deals on things. And also look for happy hours, or if a certain restaurant has like a deal that they offer, like a prefix or something on a certain day. If you look enough, you will find those type of deals in New York City. The problem is that a lot of people just don't look, and they just go into a place blindly, and they don't really kind of consider different ways to kind of just save some money and make your money stretch a little more. Like I said, when I first came to New York City, I had no money, so I was the queen of finding every single deal I could in Manhattan. There are two things that you're going to get very, very used to in New York City. One of them is going to be rats, cockroaches, mice. I hate to say it, but there are tons of that in New York City. The second is going to be garbage. Now, I put this in one category because it's kind of all together. Garbage attracts the rats and cockroaches, and together it's just like a disaster. You will get used to seeing this all the time in New York City. I remember before I moved to New York City, I obviously knew that this was there, but I didn't really think much about it. I was like, how much am I really going to see that all the time? Now, I guess it really does depend on which neighborhood you're spending your time in, where you live, things like that. If you look around on the streets of New York City, you will see it all the time if you're really paying close attention. There was a point in my first 2 years in New York City where I would go into a neighborhood and I got so good at being able to like know where the rats were at certain times of night that I literally knew exactly which streets to avoid, because I was like, there is just going to be way too many rats on that street at that time at night, and I did not want to deal with it. It was disgusting. So you will get to know way too much about these creatures in New York City if you're here long enough. Now, when it comes to garbage in New York City, it is not a good sight to see. Garbage in New York City is absolutely disgusting, because if you go to other cities around the world, sometimes they have alleyways where they actually put the garbage. So it's kind of hidden away from pedestrians and people on the street. Not in New York City. In New York City, there's not enough room for that. There is no alleyway system that they have here because it's just all streets and avenues. It's all real estate. So the garbage is on the street. And in some neighborhoods, it's definitely worse than in others, but you will see garbage piled high. Like, I'm not a very tall person, but way above my head. That is absolutely disgusting. And the garbage days are on different days in different neighborhoods. So if you're walking around enough in one day, you will definitely come across one neighborhood that has its garbage day there. That is just something to keep in mind of. And also, if you see a pile of garbage, like there could be rats in there, so stay away, like do not go near it, because nobody wants to be surprised by that. I've seen way too many people being surprised by that. So that's just something to keep in mind. Now, I don't want to scare you with that because it's not actually going to really affect your life, but it's just something to be aware of, because there's a lot of people who come to New York City for the first time and then they're just like terrified by it. And I mean, I was definitely one of those people too. So when it comes to your apartment, having rats and cockroaches, it is most likely not going to happen. Now, it's definitely going to be more common to have a roach in your apartment than a rat, but if you have a rat in your apartment, then that's a huge issue with the health department that needs to be taken up, because that's not okay. I, as a real estate agent, see these buildings exterminating all the time and really taking care of any little small issue when it comes to roaches. So rats is a whole nother level. You're really not going to see that here. It is common to see roaches, and I do have to say, as a real estate agent, I've seen way too many roaches in apartments. Most of these buildings are exterminating for that, but sometimes they just do get by, so it is something to keep in mind. One of my favorite things about New York City is really a giant melting pot. And what I mean by that is really every type of culture, every type of person is represented in New York City. You're going to see people like you in New York City, and you're going to see people who are nothing like you. And I love that about New York City. I honestly think it's one of the things that attracted me the most to New York City, is that every culture, every type of person is represented here. And I think that that's such a beautiful thing. And if you're moving to New York City from another part of the country, another part of the world, there's always going to be someone here in New York City like you, someone that moved to New York City from your home. And I think that's so cool too, because sometimes people need to kind of meet people that are from their home, because it really helps them adjust more to New York City. And if you look hard enough, you can definitely do that here. New York City has a reputation for being extremely unfriendly. Now, I do have to say, it's not necessarily that New Yorkers are unfriendly or rude people. It's more so that everyone is just really busy here, and people value their your time. And also, people are used to kind of getting like haggled on the street by people who are like selling things or like asking for money and stuff. So sometimes people just kind of try to keep to themselves because they don't want to make eye contact and get bothered by other people on the streets. You kind of learn to keep to yourself here. It's not that people are, bad people or really, really rude. It's just that they don't want to be bothered, and everybody has somewhere to go and something that they're focusing on, and they want to just kind of stay on track and not get distracted by that. Something that makes New York City living really tough sometimes is that people do come and go all the time in New York City. So you might become really good friends with someone, or you might date somebody here, and they might not stick around for the long term because New York City sometimes is a temporary place for some people, and that's completely okay. This was something that took me a while to adjust to because I would make friends here in New York City, and a few years they would be gone living somewhere else. And it's just how New York City is. It's a very transient place for some people, but you do adjust to that. But it's something that you should keep in mind too, because it's not like maybe a small town that you're from where people have been there for generations. New York City is not always like that. Sometimes people are here for a very short amount of time. So it's just something that's a little bit different than some of these more rural country places or suburban places in and around the world. So I hope that helps you prepare for an urban lifestyle in New York City. Now, I do have to say that sometimes some things make it difficult, but it's so worth it. And I can definitely say that for myself. So I would love to know, would you ever live in New York City? Or are you considering living in New York City? Because as always, I just love hearing from you guys.